Welcome to the Recharge Room. Today we are recording from the Speed River Toastmaster Club. We have a special presentation by Randy Moore. Randy will be speaking on evaluations. Randy has a special system that he's designed to help people with their evaluations. It's called the X-2-1 approach. But I'll let Randy explain that one to you. Take it away, Randy.
Welcome to the evaluation I call the X-2-1 approach to evaluating. It is October, it's the end of the calendar year, which means it is contest season. And I remember a story, 5-6 years ago, I was a test speaker at a contest, but I was also in the audience. There was two contests that evening. There was the international contest and there was the evaluation contest, and I was being evaluated by many evaluators, and there was one really, really good evaluation. It was very well done. But I knew she was going to lose. I knew she would not win. It's because she did not go ahead of time and look to see what she was being judged on as an evaluator. So I don't want you to lose any points. If you're going to be competing this year, I don't want you to lose in your evaluation contest. So I'm going to go through some different approach I use to make sure that you will get every single point you can get when it comes to judging. So here's the basics. When it comes to Toastmasters evaluation contests, we have an evaluation ballot. So you might be up there evaluating a test speaker, and in the audience there are judges, and this is what they have in front of them. They'll have a clipboard, and in front of them they have this sheet of paper, just to the left of me. And it says there's 40 points for analytical quality, 30 points for recommendations, 15 points for technique, and 15 points for summation. I remember I said the one lady didn't win. The reason she didn't win is she did not summarize her speech or her evaluation. And because of that, I knew she was going to lose 15 marks, even though she was the best evaluator. And I could see the look on her face when she didn't even place. And I could see the disappointment she had. And it really was unfortunate, but she was a new Toastmaster and didn't look ahead. Because of that, didn't even place. So I let her know, I said, before the judge, I said, the reason you didn't win is because you did not summarize. So because of that, I want to go through all 4 of these sections, and I want to go through them, and I want you to see what you're being evaluated on as an evaluator. First is analytical quality, and this is how Toastmasters defines analytical quality. Refers to the effectiveness of the evaluation. Every evaluation should carefully analyze the strengths and weaknesses of that speaker's presentation. Were the evaluator's comments clear and logical? Did the evaluator identify specific strengths and weaknesses of the presentation? Now, I realize you might be evaluating me and say, Randy, why are you reading off this slide? I am, because you need to read this as a competitor. You need to know this when you're preparing to evaluate some. So that's why I'm reading it. It's that important. Recommendations. The recommendations you're going to make to that test speaker are an important part of an evaluation. An evaluator not only points out the strengths and weaknesses of a speech, they also offer specific recommendations for improvement. Recommendations should be practical, helpful, and positive, positive being very important. And they should enable the speaker to improve his or her next presentation. Kind of like what Wayne was saying in his intro, being positive will help them change their approach next time they give a speech. The third section is technique. That refers to the manner in which the evaluator presents his or her comments and recommendations. An evaluator should be sensitive to the feelings and needs of the speaker, yet inspire and encourage the speaker in their future speaking efforts. So your technique matters when you're evaluating. And finally, summation. Summation is how the evaluator concludes the evaluation. The conclusion should briefly summarize the evaluator's comments and suggestions and be positive and encouraging. And this is where a lot of people lose points and don't go farther in evaluations, is because they don't do that summation. So you want to look at those 4 areas and you want to know them before you compete. You don't want to find out afterwards. You want to know before. So with that, when it comes to evaluating, you should hopefully have a toolbox. The better speaker you are, will make you a better evaluator. The more you study the art of public speaking and rhetoric, the better you'll be to be able to notice things when you're evaluating a speaker. So if you have a toolbox of things you've learned here at Toastmasters, you can then impart that knowledge to those who are coming up and those who you want to evaluate. So if you've already taken the opportunity to learn at Toastmasters how to make good hand gestures, I prefer, like an open hand versus a closed hand. This, says you want to fight. Sometimes that might be needed in a speech if you're talking about fighting in boxing. But most of the time you want open hand gestures. That's something you could comment on as an evaluator. Hands in pockets. Now you can't see, but if a person was hands in pockets the whole time and very closed in, that might be something in your toolbox you have in your mind. That's something I can recommend to the speakers to learn how to use those hand gestures. Now there are many more tips and tricks and you can put in your toolbox when it comes to gestures. So ask the question, what's in your toolbox when it comes to hand gestures? Maybe you should make one. Next is language. It's an area I'm very weak in because I typically speak in short sentences and simple sentences. But my friend Sue, she's absolutely amazing. She can do metaphors and alliteration and triads. And there's all these different use of language techniques that you can use. If you learn them, then you can recommend them as an evaluator. Vocal variety, things like you hear someone speaking and let them know they really shouldn't drink coffee before a speech. Maybe you heard some hoarseness in their voice. You could say, did you drink coffee? Oh, probably shouldn't have done that. Maybe you should have had tea or water. Using your vocal variety to say loud or to be quiet, you can give some suggestions there. When it comes to using your voice in preparation before a speech, you can say the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. Do that a couple times. It's good to warm up the throat before you speak. Things like tongue twisters help for vocal variety. Also, things like body language. Sometimes I'm standing right now, but if we weren't on Zoom and I got really low, I can bring the audience in. That's something in my toolbox I can recommend. Ask me where their shoulders should look. Are their shoulders really stiff? How can they move? Storytelling, dialogue is something I recommend often for speeches. Instead of telling a story, you tell a story through dialogue. It's a very advanced method. Also, things like humor. You can teach people about the limbic system. I'll maybe in a future presentation, I'll talk about that. And another humor tip is don't laugh at your own jokes. It is so hard for me to not laugh at my own jokes because I'm so funny. That's why I always laugh at my own jokes, but it ruins my jokes because I laugh. Yeah. Okay, so those are some toolbox, and you want to keep those in your mind because you want to be very specific. The more specific you are, generally, the better you'll do as an evaluator. Okay, so if you're in Toastmasters and you are at a competition, here's how a competition works. If you've never been in a Toastmasters competition, there's a test speaker. So the organizer of the event brings a special speaker in, and there might be 3 to 5 evaluators all evaluating the same speech. You have 5 minutes to make your notes. You have the whole time during their speech, and then they give you 5 minutes to make your notes. They'll take you off into a different room. You have 5 minutes, and you need to use those 5 minutes as expedient as possible. You need to be very quick with your use of that time. So I've developed a method for saving as much time as possible on my one sheet, because you're allowed one sheet of paper. That's all you're allowed for your notes. And I've developed this method. So imagine here you've got your sheet of paper, and this sheet of paper is what you're taking your notes on. First thing I do is I draw a line, 2/3 and generally 1/3 between, I separate the page, between 1/3 on the right, 2/3 on the left. Then I get the speaker's name. It is so important. You don't want to forget the person's name. So that way you can say, hello, Harold, thank you for your speech today. You don't want to forget that. It's also a nice idea to know the speech title or the path that they're working on. You want to make sure you get those pieces of information. Then everything below that are my notes. So while the person is speaking, and I set this up all ahead of time, I set the whole schematic before the speaker even speaks. I've already said as much as I can get. I draw the line, I write the notes, and I put the right side, which I'll show you later. I put all the schematic ahead of time, the infrastructure. Then during the speech, I start making notes. Now, sometimes I split this section into three. I'll have an intro section, a body section, and a conclusion. And then I start making my notes, whether good or bad, in those sections. And then I see how they went from their intro, how they transitioned to their body, how they transitioned to their conclusion. And I'll take my notes in accordingly. But you don't always have to do that. Sometimes what you can do instead is you can do things like gestures, body language, storytelling, language usage. Use that toolbox that you have as a Toastmaster, also from other evaluations you've seen. Hopefully by now you've built up a toolbox. The bigger the toolbox, the bigger chance you have to winning that contest. Next is I always like to put a little time box. So at the end of the time, now this is generally not a competition. I would do this for another member. I would have a time section to see. So I give this to them. I give this whole sheet to the speaker. So that way they are able to know what their time was. If they didn't write it down, they've got it from me as an evaluator. And also sometimes if it's a humorous speech, I'll often have a little laughs box and I'll do little ticks for every time the audience laughs or chuckles, just so they know how many times did they get the crowd laughing, because I find that that's kind of important, especially if it's a humorous speech. All right, next is what I'll do is once I've got all the notes, then I'll check lists. So let's say someone had a really powerful intro and they told a really funny joke. I would write powerful intro, funny joke, and I would be specific, the joke about the donkey or whatever it was, and I would put a check mark for those, all the good things, and X's for the tip, the future tips, or think constructive criticism that I'm going to use. Because they're not going to be in order. I don't want to present an order on the left side of my sheet, because I need to prioritize what I want to tell them that they did well, what they could do better. I want to prioritize how I present those pieces of information, those notes that I've made throughout the speech and throughout my 5-minute time period. From there, I have the right side organized. Now, normally before the speech even starts, I already have this section written down. I have my intro section, what they did well, 2 little tips to make their speech better, and what they did best. This is why I call it the X-2-1 approach. X means it could be X number of things they did well. Anything from 2 to 5 things they did well. If you're in a competition though, try to keep it under 3. If you go 4 or 5, you might go over time. So try to keep your X to 3. So 3, 2, 1 approach to evaluating. So 3 things they did well, 2 little tips to make their speech better, and what they did best. Now with the tips, you could say, you don't ever say what they did bad. You say you want to be positive. So what they think tips they could do better. Oh, and why do I say, I used to say good, better, best, or good, but I've been corrected enough times by my friend Murray that my grammar is bad when I said, here are 3 things you did good. That is bad grammar. So I changed it to say 3 things you did well. Better grammar, so you don't want to lose any grammar points when you're doing your evaluation. So here's what I thought you did well. Then from there, I then prioritize the tips. So what they did good, I will throw into that well section. Tips we'll put in that X in the tip section, and then also I'll take what I thought they did absolutely best and the best. I generally do the center part first. So I do the well, tips, and best first. I get that done and I prioritize them. If I already know what I think they did, so let's say their speech was really funny, very humorous, I will put that as best. So I know that was the best tip. I'll put it there. Then all the other check marks that I liked, let's say they had a great outline, or they had excellent transitions, or their gestures were just spot on that day, I'm going to put that in the well category and use that up. Now, when it comes to tips, don't do any more than 2. We don't want to be too negative. If you're too negative, you will lose points from the judges. If you've never been a judge before, I can tell you the other judges don't like it when you are too negative. So you never want to go too negative. Sometimes you might only want to use 1 tip. But what I generally do is I do 1 small little tip. The first tip is a small tip, and the second tip is a larger tip, something that's a little more important. So let's say they had too many ums and ahs. That's the kind of thing I'm going to put in tip 1, because it's not really that important. It is important, but it's not nearly as important as some of the other things we could say. And then, but let's say there was something, you paused too long, or or didn't pause enough. Sorry, let's just say they didn't pause enough in their presentation. That's something you want to put in tip 2, because that's going to give a lot more bang for the buck than say something small like you didn't move to, if you're in person, oh, you didn't move away from the lectern, keep your lectern. That's kind of a level 1 kind of tip. It's too basic. You want your more in-depth, deeper, something about metaphors or language, something that's a little more powerful to help a person as your second tip. Once I have all that done, I ask myself, is there a theme to this speech? If someone's not the best speaker, I actually prefer to evaluate people who aren't that good or people who are great, but people who are mediocre are actually quite hard for me. If someone does a really good speech, I'm going to say something like, I can imagine you doing this speech in ABC format. Let's say it was a motivational speech. I could absolutely see, and obviously you have to be honest, I could absolutely see you speaking in front of 100 people giving this presentation. That's the kind of intro you want to give, because you want to start on a positive. You want to be really positive and excited for that person because you want them to go forward. If someone say didn't do a great job, I might say something different. I might say, well, I noticed there was a couple issues with this presentation. I might not even start with that. I would probably say, I noticed that you probably weren't as prepared as you could have been, because I know this speech could be amazing if you had just practiced a couple more times. That's going to help a person be a little bit more encouraged to speak the next time versus, wow, you really bombed. You're not going to say something like that. You want to be as encouraging as possible. And finally, I've got my intro, I got my theme. If possible, I recap with that theme. So I'll say, you could give this presentation, I can imagine, to 500 real estate agents. And you would say, that's your intro. You did these things well. These are your 2 tips. This is what you did best. Recap, what you did well, what tips best. And then, wow, I really think you should consider using this for a prepackaged presentation for a group of real estate agents, if that was the example. And that is my X21 approach. It saves you a lot of time in the note taking. You might not like the format on the right. You might have your own, but that note section, dividing the third and 2/3, will be really helpful for saving time and putting you in the position to win for our club or your club for the evaluation approach. I hope that was helpful to you. I know it was helpful to me. It got me to district a couple of years ago. I believe in 2022, I was the Division W evaluation champion, and it was because I used this approach, and hopefully it will help you. Back to you, Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you, Randy. That was awesome, and I love your slides and the simplicity of them. Miss Timer, if you would give us 1 minute on the time so that members can send Randy some notes about what they loved about his presentation and if there's any changes they would like to see him do. Thank you for joining us here at the Recharge Room. I hope you enjoyed this presentation by Randy Moore on evaluations. We look forward to seeing you again on our next video.